You know the story they tell about the samurai, right? It's a tale woven with threads of fearless men, unyielding honor, and the glint of cold steel. It's epic, it's iconic, and honestly, it's only half the truth. What if I told you that in one of the last desperate stands of the samurai era, the most ferocious charge wasn't led by some grizzled, battle-hardened warrior, but by a woman? A woman whose final, heartbreaking wish wasn't for glory in the next life, but for her own sister to strike off her head. A brutal act of love, just so the enemy couldn't claim it as a trophy? This isn't just a footnote. This is the incredible, almost unbelievable story of Nakano Takeko and the fierce female samurai that Japan, for a time, genuinely tried to erase from its history books. The year is 1868. Japan, a nation that had largely sealed itself off from the world for over 2 centuries under the iron fist of the Tokugawa shogunate, was tearing itself apart. Imagine a society frozen in time, where tradition was paramount, and then suddenly colossal black ships from foreign lands appeared on the horizon, their cannons a stark declaration that the world had moved on. These weren't just ships, they were harbingers of an unstoppable modern age, forcing open Japan's ports and shattering its carefully constructed isolation. The country faced an existential choice: cling to its medieval past or race headlong into a future it barely understood. This seismic shift ignited a powder keg. On one side, you had the emperor's new government, a rising power advocating for a centralized, modern empire, looking to shed the old ways and embrace Western technology and political structures. On the other, the old shogunate, clinging desperately to the established feudal order, the samurai class, and the traditions that had defined Japan for generations. This wasn't just a political squabble, it was a clash of worldviews, a brutal civil war known as the Boshin War, literally the War of the Year of the Dragon. Think about the imagery. Sleek, newly imported French rifles and powerful cannons rolling against ancient armor, polished katanas, and an unshakable sense of samurai pride. It was a technological mismatch, a generational conflict, and a cultural reckoning all rolled into one. While most grand histories tend to zoom in on the big-name battles, the famous generals, and the pivotal political maneuvering, one small, fiercely independent corner of the country, the Aizu domain, deep in the snowy, rugged mountains of today's Fukushima prefecture, was about to write a chapter so wild, so defiant, that for decades, textbooks simply left it out. They couldn't quite figure out where it fit into the neat narrative of a modernizing Japan. Nakano Takeko wasn't born into a grand, powerful samurai clan, but her family, while minor, was certainly respected within the Aizu domain. She arrived in April of 1847, a time when the echoes of Japan's forced opening were already rumbling across the land. From a surprisingly young age, just 6 years old, she was handed a naginata. Now this wasn't just any weapon. The naginata, that distinctive curved bladed polearm, was the traditional weapon of the Onna-bugeisha, the female warriors of Japan. For centuries, samurai women had wielded it to defend their homes, their children, and their honor when the men were away fighting or on duty. It wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of their vital, often overlooked role in the samurai social structure. Takeko didn't just learn to use it, she mastered it. By the age of 12, she wasn't just proficient, she could outspar most boys, often to their considerable embarrassment. She possessed a natural talent, a fierce dedication, and a physical prowess that defied the expectations of her era. But her education wasn't solely martial. By 16, she was teaching poetry in Quito, a testament to the well-rounded education expected of a samurai, even a female one. Yet even amidst her scholarly pursuits, her martial skills never dulled. Legend has it she quietly won duels against street thugs, men who likely laughed at the idea of a girl with a stick until they found themselves on the receiving end of her swift, precise movements. Her reputation, though perhaps whispered, was already growing. When the Boshin War finally erupted, tearing through the land, Aizu's lords, facing an existential threat, issued their orders, every able-bodied man to the front lines. Women, they decreed, were to contribute by sewing banners, cooking rice, and tending to the wounded, the traditional supportive roles. But Takeko? She rolled her eyes, metaphorically speaking. She cut her hair short, a symbolic act of defiance against feminine norms, grabbed her naginata, and started drilling her cousins in the family courtyard. She wasn't going to sit idly by while her home burned. Officially, the Aizu domain, steeped in tradition, had a strict policy. Women were banned from combat, period. But unofficially, The domain was teetering on the brink of desperation. The imperial forces, with their modern arms and growing numbers, were relentless. Takeko, never one to be deterred by bureaucratic pronouncements, petitioned the senior retainer not once, but twice. Her proposal was direct, confident. "Give me a unit," she argued, "and I'll hold the northern ridge." Imagine the scene. A young woman, barely out of her teens, standing before a council of grizzled, traditionalist samurai demanding command. Both times, the council members reportedly muttered about tradition, about propriety, about the way things are done. The answer was a polite but firm no. So, what does a stubborn, fiercely patriotic 21-year-old do when denied a formal role in defending her home? She does what any determined leader would. She builds her own army. Within a single week, a remarkable testament to her charisma and the shared desperation of the women of Aizu, more than 30 women, some of them barely 14 years old, had slipped out of the castle town. They weren't armed with modern rifles. They carried spare armor, often ill-fitting, and sharpened kitchen knives alongside their traditional naginatas. They called themselves the Jooshi, which translates simply to Girls' Army. And they elected Takeko as their commander. Not just because of her unparalleled skill, but perhaps with a touch of dark humor, because she was apparently the only one who could make the spare armor fit well enough to actually fight in. Their formation wasn't sanctioned, it was an act of pure, desperate will. It was October 1868. The air was crisp, the mountains already dusted with the first hints of winter snow. Imperial troops, now fully armed with those devastating French rifles, were pushing relentlessly up the valley. Their objective, Aizu Wakamatsu Castle, the heart of the domain. Takeko's Jooshi, her band of courageous volunteers, were dispatched, still unofficially of course, to hold a small shrine gate overlooking the main road. This wasn't a strategic stronghold, but a crucial choke point. The conditions were brutal. It was snowing lightly, the flakes swirling around them as they lay hidden in ditches, their naginatas concealed under straw, waiting. The tension must have been unbearable, the cold biting, but their resolve was unwavering. At dawn, the first skirmishers of the Imperial army appeared, confident, unsuspecting. Takeko, with nerves of steel, let them come within arm's reach, allowing them to fully commit to the path before she sprang. It was a perfectly timed ambush. Eyewitnesses, both friend and foe, later wrote of her incredible speed and skill, describing the sweep of her blade as looking like a silver wheel in the half-light, a blur of deadly motion. The initial shock and ferocity of the Jooshi attack were devastating. Imperial records, typically terse and focused on the grand strategy, contain a rare, telling admission: unexpected female resistance, heavy casualties. Can you imagine the surprise, the bewilderment of these seasoned Imperial soldiers encountering a force of women fighting with such desperate skill? It wasn't just a skirmish, it was a brutal, determined stand. The girls' army, against all odds, bought the castle 3 extra precious hours. In the grand scheme of a months-long siege, 3 hours might seem tiny, insignificant. But if you were inside those castle walls, facing an overwhelming enemy, those 3 hours were absolutely priceless. Time to reinforce, to strategize, to breathe. It was a moment of true, unadulterated heroism. By afternoon, the brutal reality of the Imperial numbers and their superior firepower began to tell. The crackle of rifle fire was incessant, ripping through the quilted armor of the samurai, both men and women. The sounds of battle must have been deafening, the air thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. In the chaos, Takeko, leading from the very front as always, took a mani ball, a devastating conical rifle bullet to the chest. It was a mortal wound. She knew immediately, and she knew what capture meant. For a samurai, falling into enemy hands was a fate worse than death, especially for a woman. She would be paraded through Edo, the capital, as a novelty prisoner, a grotesque trophy. Her honor and the honor of her family would be irrevocably stained. So, with her dying breath, she issued her final command, a heart-wrenching order to her younger sister Masako, who fought by her side. "Cut off my head. Bury it under a pine tree. Don't let them have it." Imagine Masako's agony, to be asked to perform such an act of love, to sever the head of her beloved sister, her leader, her inspiration. She initially refused, weeping, her hands trembling. But the samurai code, the weight of honor, and Takeko's fierce gaze compelled her. She obeyed. The sisters, in a moment of profound tragic intimacy amidst the carnage, wrapped Takeko's severed head in a sleeve, a final, tender shroud. Masako, along with another female fighter, then dashed back to the castle, carrying their fallen commander's last remains. The siege, now infused with a fresh wave of grim determination from Takeko's sacrifice, went on for another brutal month, a testament to the Aizu spirit. When Aizu finally surrendered, the Jooshi was gone. its members either fallen or dispersed. Only stories remained, passed in hushed whispers, because the new Meiji government, eager to present a modern, unified Japan, wanted the world to forget that women had ever fought, much less led, in such a defiant manner. With the Boshin War finally over and the Meiji Restoration firmly established, the new government embarked on a deliberate campaign to modernize Japan, which included reshaping its social fabric. They actively promoted the good wife, wise mother, Ryosai Kembo ideal, emphasizing women's roles as nurturers, homemakers, and supporters of the nation through domesticity. This image was entirely at odds with the reality of fierce female warriors like Nakano Takeko. Consequently, sword practice for girls was banned in state schools, and the very concept of the Onna-bugeisha was systematically downplayed, if not outright erased, from official chronicles. Takiko's name, her incredible acts of bravery, slipped from the mainstream historical narrative, becoming a quiet, inconvenient truth. But history, especially local history, has a stubborn way of remembering. Every autumn, in Aizu, the very place she fought and fell, local women still gather at the Hotoji temple. They lay white chrysanthemums, symbols of purity and grief, on a modest, unassuming stone. It reads simply, Grave of Nakano Takeko, 1847 to 1868. It's a defiant act of remembrance, a quiet refusal to let her memory fade. If you want more untold stories like this, stories that scramble the official version of the past and shine a light on forgotten heroes, make sure you tap that subscribe button. And please, drop a comment below about another forgotten warrior or historical figure you think absolutely deserves the spotlight. The algorithm only shows these incredible tales if it knows people genuinely care about hearing them.